Hey everybody, I'm MS Farzan, and welcome to this video on working with Vue for digital tabletop web development. If you've been following along with my series on learning JavaScript for digital tabletop game and web development, this video will be a great entry point for the web development track of our learning. If you're coming to this video from somewhere else, it will still be a great entry point for learning Vue for digital tabletop web development. Let's get started. As you can see, I'm on the website for Vue.js, which, as you can see as well, is the progressive JavaScript framework, which is a fancy way of saying that Vue is a JavaScript framework for doing front-end development. So you can make nice single-page applications and websites that have nice interactivity. And what I like about Vue is that it conceptually is, once you understand how it works and what you're using it for, can be very easy to spin up new projects, web-based projects and web apps. And it's intuitive to use, and importantly, it allows us to create a sandbox or a playground to do a lot of work in HTML, CSS, and also JavaScript, which we'll discuss in this video. My goal for this video is to get you accustomed to how to spin up a Vue template and use the command line interface to use what's called the Vue CLI, or the Vue command line interface, to make projects. And eventually we'll make a simple dice roller that will roll dice for us behind the scenes or under the hood, and have a simple user interface that will allow us to interact with that dice roller. So when we think about different types of web frameworks, there are so many different things that we can use to enhance the interactivity of websites. Ordinarily, those frameworks will work with JavaScript to add that interactivity to our websites, which will be based on HTML and CSS. We'll talk about HTML and CSS in a moment, but just keep it in your mind that the backbone of your website is going to be based on HTML and CSS, whereas the interactivity is going to come from JavaScript, and that's where Vue comes in. If you've heard of other web frameworks or libraries like React, or there's 100 other things like Meteor, or one of the most famous ones is called jQuery. Each one of these libraries or frameworks adds interactivity using JavaScript in a different way, and they have their own learning curves. I think that Vue is actually a pretty good entry point for learning about JavaScript front-end frameworks if you're trying to get simple projects up and running quickly. Something we're going to use to make our process of using Vue easier is called the Vue CLI, or Vue command line interface. As you can see, it says that it's standard tooling for Vue.js development. What it does, it helps us to scaffold a project quickly, and it allows us to create a local web server that will spin up all of our files for us and display them in a web browser without us having to do any work. And it actually will restart that server, and reload our web page when we make changes to our code, which is pretty cool. If you're looking at this website, which I highly recommend that you poke around both the Vue.js website and the CLI website, you click on Get Started and look at installation, you'll see that there are a couple of installation commands that you'll need to run. And I should say also that if you haven't been following along with my previous videos on the topic, you'll also need to install Node.js, which will act as our runtime, and have a command line interface that you're comfortable using. We'll be using git bash, but you could use something else like command prompt or terminal or something else, and some sort of code editor so that we can write and edit our code. I'm using Visual Studio, but you could just as easily use Atom or Vim, or something else that you prefer. So in your command line interface, you're going to want to make sure that you install the Vue CLI by typing in, I don't need to do it because I already have it installed, but you would type in your command line interface npm install -g at Vue/CLI. npm is the Node package manager that is bundled with Node.js, and it handles the dependencies that you might need for your projects. And by saying -g, you're saying I want to install it globally on my system, not just in a local area of your system. And obviously at Vue/CLI, that's just saying that's what I want npm to install. Once you've done that, you'll see that when you want to create an instant prototype, or if you want to create a project here, there are many ways of doing that, and we're just going to use the basic way of doing that. And what we'll do is we'll go into our command line interface, and I'm going to navigate to the project directory that I want to use. The one that we have been using in our previous series, at least on my desktop, is in the coding/JavaScript/tutorial-project directory, but you can put this wherever you like. And then I'm going to say Vue create, and let's call this, what do we want to call this? Dice-roller. And then I'll see that the Vue CLI is asking me if I want to pick a preset between Babel or ESLint. What you can just do is just use press enter whenever you need to here to make sure that the Vue CLI just handles everything for us. It will install some dependencies and scaffold a project for us, and this will create a nice sandbox for us to do our work. While we're waiting for this to install, it would also just be a good idea to mention that if you're not familiar with using the command line interface, except for the extent that we've used it in our video series, it would be a great homework project to just look up some of the commands that you can do in your particular command line interface. Like if you're using git bash, we've only really used the cd command to navigate between directories, or to the ls or dir commands to list what's in those directories. But if the command line interface is something that scares you, or if it's feels foreign or not familiar to you, now would be a really good time to familiarize yourself with some of the commands, even if it's just silly things like making a directory or deleting directories, because you'll be using it throughout your coding journey, and it's better to get familiar with it early on if you can. As you can see, I've successfully installed the packages that I need, and I get a helpful hint from the Vue CLI that what I need to do is navigate to my dice roller directory and type in the command npm run serve. Let's take a look at that. I'll go into cd dice-roller, and I will say dir or ls to see what's in the folder. And I see that there are a bunch of files that have been created for me, and a couple of folders. And if I navigate to this directory in my code editor, I see I'm in the tutorial project directory, and we have this log.js file that we created in a previous series. If I navigate to the dice roller directory, I see the same stuff that I saw in my command line interface. And the first thing that I want you to take a look at is this package.json file. JSON is a method of storing data, and it is set up in these key value pairs where we'll have a key, like the name of the project, and then the value will be whatever that value is ascribed to that name. We've named it's the Vue CLI has named it dice roller for us. And the two things that I want you to see right now are the dependencies that are required. A dependency is like a package or some sort of tools that are required in the creation or the management of the app that we're making. Right now, our dependencies are core JS and also Vue. In terms of dependencies, we have more dependencies for the development aspect of this project. We don't really need to talk about them right now, but I also want you to see the scripts area, where there are certain scripts that correspond to when we say npm run or node package manager run. We can determine that there's a certain script that we want to run within our code that will do a certain thing based on the packages that we've installed. So when we say npm run serve, what's actually happening is node package manager is using the Vue command line interface service to serve a new website for us, or to serve the website that it has packaged for us. If we wanted to build it for deployment and actually send our website out into the world, we could do that with by writing npm build, which corresponds here to Vue CLI service build. Not super important right now, but it's great for you to be exposed to this early on. There are two folders that are scaffolded for us. One is called public, the other one is called source or SRC. In the public folder, there's an index.html file, which serves as just a boilerplate that is used as most websites have an index.html as the entry point for the website. And there's not much in this file that we need to look at. We just need to see that it exists for us, and the Vue CLI uses it as the entry point for our application. We've also got a favicon icon that we'll see in just a moment what it's used for. Most websites will have like a public directory where you'll have assets and like an index.html, and then they'll have a source folder, which is where all the source code exists. And truly, this main.js file is the entry point for our Vue app in terms of the JavaScript functionality of it. It's not too important to understand what's going on here right now, but if you'd like to look it up, you're free to learn more about Vue on the Vue website, or perhaps watch a video about it. We won't be diving too much in depth to this part of it in this video, but I just want you to see that the essential part of it is that this is the entry point for the JavaScript application that we're going to be working on. And even though we're not going to touch the main.js, we are going to work with the app.vue file. A .vue file is kind of like a component file that Vue uses. When you see a .vue file, you can pretty much be safely assured that you're working with a file that draws upon the Vue framework or conforms to the way that Vue wants its files to work. We're going to look at each one of these aspects of it in turn, as I'm pretty much presuming that you're coming to this video with very little or no HTML or CSS background. In terms of the components and assets directory, if you have other assets that you'd like to use that are not necessarily accessible to the user that's coming to your website, in terms of the front end, you could put that in your source directory and have that be in your like in an assets folder. Right now they just have this Vue logo that they've installed for us. And then components, we mentioned a little bit, but just to put a finer point on it, components are a great way of keeping your code segmented into different areas of your application file structure so that you don't have thousands of lines of code in one file. And that's what you use components for. One of the things that you use components for, they add logic and functionality to your website while also keeping things consolidated in different places and compartmentalized. So before we talk about like what's all this stuff in these files that we've never seen before, let's just run this application and see what it looks like. So now that I'm in the dice roller folder, I'm going to write npm run serve, and that runs the Vue CLI service serve command. And then we see a bunch of stuff load up on my command line interface. And finally, we see this indication that the app is running at on the local desktop http://localhost 8080. That just means that the Vue CLI has spun up a server for us and is displaying the contents of our application on port 8080. What I need to do is go to a new web browser and type in localhost 8080, or if you want to do the full thing, you could say http://localhost 8080. And now we have our website that is just running for us like this, and all of these links work. If I want to click over to the Vue CLI documentation, if I want to click into these plugins or other links, and we have that that logo that we discussed earlier. So this is what a scaffolded or templated Vue project looks like when we're using the Vue CLI. And we're going to look at each parts of these in turn. In the most simplest website that you could possibly have, you'll have a file that will be filled with HTML, which is short an acronym for Hypertext Markup Language, which forms the backbone of all of the websites that you have ever visited. The way that if you look at just like a basic HTML file, it will look very different from what we're looking at right now, because we have a lot more in this Vue file that we would have in a basic HTML file. But what's great about Vue is that in between these template tags, we can write HTML. And that's what we're going to use in our applications. And it's a really fun way to have an easy sandbox to work with when we're learning about HTML and creating websites, because we can make changes and save them on the fly, and then the Vue CLI will just reload the page for us, and we can it's very modular in that way. When we want to do if we just had basic text, we could easily make an entire website through HTML and also add some style to it. But if we wanted to add a lot more style, like we wanted to make all the text centered here on this page, or we wanted to change all the color to blue, or we wanted to change the background to a different color, we could do that within the HTML, or we could use what's called CSS, or cascading style sheets. That's a way of adding design and styling to your website without having to configure every little bit of text or every line or every image. We'll take a look at how to do that. And what's cool about Vue is that right at the bottom of this Vue component, we have these style tags, and in between them we can add our CSS for our application or our website, or even just a small portion of our website, which is super neat and useful. Something that I really like about Vue is that I can change the HTML and the cascading style sheets, or the CSS, within one file and have that applied to the whole application. Or if I'm working at the component level with just one specific component, like let's say a box of text or one image or something like that, I can edit all of that within that one file, and I don't have to have a bunch of separate files and try to remember where my CSS lives or where my HTML lives, which, if you've worked in web development at all, you will know that to be the case when you're working with basic HTML and CSS. So Vue allows us to edit and build our websites with these nice templated projects pretty easily. If you want a project, which I recommend you try at some point, try and make just a basic HTML/CSS project after working through the contents of this video, but don't use Vue, and follow another tutorial about how to do that. And I think you'll easily see what Vue does for us that helps us to scaffold projects pretty quickly. Finally, there are these two script tags right in the middle. So we have the template tags up top that allow us to add HTML in between them. We have style, which allows us to add CSS. And we have this script, which is where all of our JavaScript is going to go. And Vue, similar to other frameworks for web development and basically any programming, requires you to use your JavaScript knowledge in a very specific way. There's almost like a separate learning curve to when you're learning a framework than when you're originally learning a language. And when you take that knowledge to another framework, you might have to relearn some things or everything all over again, because they can be very opinionated in the way that they present things and want you to do things. What we see here in the script area is that we're importing a component called Hello World from this file path. The dot just means the beginning of the file path begins with the folder that we're currently in, and then we're going to navigate to the components directory, and then we're going to find a hello world.vue component. And then we're going to export this app that we're working on, or this itself as a component. We're going to export it with the name app, and we're including the component that we imported, which is hello world. Not too important right now, just want you to see that there's a relationship here. And who are we exporting it to? Well, we're importing it in the main.js file, which you remember is the main entry point for the JavaScript portion of this application. And we're using that app to be rendered or to be put on screen in our index.html. Cool. We're ready to learn some stuff. But to do that, we got to delete everything. So you see everything that we got right here. Let's start working on the HTML aspect of this application. Let's delete the image from the get-go and save it. And when we delete the line about the image, we see that that Vue logo is no longer there. We just see the text. And let's talk about how to actually write HTML by, you know what the heck. You only live once. Let's just delete everything. I've deleted everything in between the template tags, and we might see an error that, yes, when we go back to our website, it says that the template requires exactly one root element and the hello world component has been registered but not used. That just means that if you say that I'm going to use a component, the Vue CLI is going to make sure that you use it. So we're just going to delete this reference as well. And we're going to just add back this these two tags that say div, div and /div. When I save it, I forgot to delete this line about hello world. Just want to make this as clean as we can without any. Great. Okay. Unadulterated website that has nothing in it. All we've done is between the template tags, we've created this div element, and as I mouse over it with my mouse, we see in Visual Studio, it says the div element has no special meaning at all. It represents its children. It can be used with the class, lang, and title attributes, blah, 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 whatever. Let's talk about divs in a moment. Let's say that I want to create a little bit of text in my template. I could say, hello world, and save it. And then if I go back to my website, I see that I get an error that essentially means that anything I want to be rendered has to be between these two div tags. And as you see, as is the convention in HTML, if we have a tag, we have a like a triangle bracket followed by whatever the tag is, and there are specific words that are used for these tags, and we'll go over several of them. And then we close that tag with another triangle bracket. And then everything within that or enclosed or encapsulated within that is we can close the loop on it by saying / and then the same tag afterwards. So everything within the template tags is also indented just by convention so that we can tell which things are parented to which. Right now we just have a div tag or a div element that is a child, as is said, of the template element. Within the div element, we have this text that says hello world. If I save it and I go back to my website, I see that it says hello world here. So we can write text like that, but it is convention to have these p tags on either side of whatever text you're using. These p tags, as it says here, the p element represents a paragraph. So if I want to encapsulate a paragraph, what I can do is keep them in between these two p tags. One opens the paragraph element, this one that just says p, and then I close it by having a /p. If I wanted to have like a header, maybe above the hello world, I could say h1. This is a header. And I see that I have a bolded and much larger piece of text here that says this is a header. If I wanted something in between, maybe something smaller, I could say h2, this is a smaller header. And we take a look at that, and Vue CLI has reloaded our page. This is a smaller header. I could say h3, this is an even smaller header. I think you see where this is going. And finally, we end with the p tags, which is kind of like the default of whatever font or font size we're using in our application. Cool. So if I wanted to create some HTML that, let's say, is bolded, I could, in between these tags, say b tags, save it, and I see my hello world is now bolded, which is pretty cool. I could do that if I wanted it to be italicized as well. Whoops, got one too many tags here. So now that I've added both bold, or as we mouse over it, the B element represents a span of text to which attention is being drawn for utilitarian purposes. Whereas the I element represents a span of text in an alternate voice or mood. I really like these tooltips. They're pretty interestingly written. But essentially, these tags allow me to change the styling within a single line, or perhaps I wanted, instead of just the hello world to be italicized, I could say that I actually want all of these lines to be italicized, and I would see everything's italicized. The point is that we can use these tags to ensure that everything between them has some sort of styling associated with them. But this can get pretty tedious, as it already has been. I'm going to actually delete some of this stuff to change all of these things one by one. And it's also kind of ugly to look at. So why don't I just delete all the styling here, and we can discuss what cascading style sheets are used for. When we use CSS, which, as you'll recall, is done down here in between the style tags in Vue. Actually, delete what's already there. I'm able to apply style to all of the elements that I signify during the time which I'm creating my CSS and my HTML. So if I want all of my headers, my H1 headers, to have a particular style, I could say H1 color blue. And the syntax for this is whatever you want to change the style for, and then the curly braces or curly brackets like you would see in a code block in JavaScript, and then you'll indent here and you'll say whatever it is about that element you want to change, followed by a colon, and then the value that you want to change it to, and then a semicolon. And when I save it, we'll see that the header is now a blue header. But that might not seem very different from what we've just done. But if I had two headers, this one says this is also a header, then we see that the cascading style sheets has applied the same style to both of these different things. If I wanted my H2 headers to be italic, I could say H2 font dash style, not stretch, style italic. And now all of my H2 headers will be italic, which is pretty cool. So, you know, if I wanted my the body of my website to have a hot pink background, I can absolutely do that and it will be beautiful. So yeah, that's actually pretty amazing looking. In any case, the cascading style sheets are what you'll use to add style to multiple or sometimes even just single areas of your HTML pretty easily and naturally, which is pretty cool. This video isn't meant to give you, an in-depth survey of all the different types of CSS and HTML that you can use. I'll leave that up to you to figure out how you want to style your website and for your own projects. But what's important to see is that we're able to do this all within our Vue command line interface without having to reload the page or create a server ourselves or any of those things, which is really, really cool. One thing I do want to note, because we'll probably use it in our dice roller, is the use of IDs and classes, which are different from classes in JavaScript, as I'm sure you've heard before, we've discussed in previous videos. If I want, let's say we have, let's delete some of these headers. Let's just have our H1 headers. And we'll say, let's say this is a header. This is a bold header. And then H1, this is a bold and hot pink header. Okay, let's take a look at this. So we have, this is a header, this is a bold header, this is a bold and hot pink header. In fact, let's change this to italics since we've been using that. This is an italics header, and italicized, that's better. This is an italicized and hot pink header. And hello world. Okay. So, and we'll remove this line about color blue. Oh no, let's keep it actually. Let's keep it. So let's say that I have these three HTML elements, which are headers, that I have now applied the blue color to all of them. And I want to change this specific one to be italicized, this second one, and I don't want to do that within my HTML, which I very much could do. I could say that this H1 within the tag, I could write something about its style and say style font style italic, and see that this is an italicized header. That's just the convention. You're basically writing your CSS in line. Let's say I don't want to do that, and I just want to keep all my styling in my CSS. What I can do is I can create a custom class by saying dot italicized. You can call it whatever you want. And I treat this just as I would another element, like the H1 element. And I will say font style italic. What I can do is within this opening tag for the H1 element, I can say H1 class equals italicized. And I see this is an italicized header. Similarly, I can add that to the other H1 element and say class equals italicized. And I see this is a header, this is an italicized header, and this is an italicized and hot pink header. What I've done is applied this custom class with the font style italic to both of these H1 elements. Very good. If I want to apply a specific piece of style to a specific piece of HTML, I can use what's called an ID. The way that I signify that is I write a hash or a pound sign, and let's call this hash hot pink. And within it, I will say color hot pink. And next to this, or even before this class, I can say ID equals hot pink. And you can see that it has that our cascading style sheets has applied only to this this element, this H1 element here. This is an italicized and hot pink header, which is really cool because that means that I can apply from my cascading style sheets style to a singular element within it. Right now we've done it to this H1 element, or by using a class I can apply it to multiple elements at my fancy, which is awesome. We're going to be using that. So that is a really basic introduction to Vue and particularly the HTML, CSS, HTML and CSS aspects of Vue. Just about all that you need to know to cover what we're going to cover in the next video, which is creating our simple dice roller. We might not even really have to use the CSS, but I'd like for you to be familiar with it so that you can make things pretty to your heart's content and make them look the way that you want to look, whether or not they're just going to be simulations that you're running, or if you're going to be creating websites that are useful for your tabletop games. So tune in to the next video for more on Vue. And I hope this video has been helpful for you. If it has, please like it and subscribe to my channel. I'd love for your help in telling people about my games and books by going to entromancy.com or nightpathpub.com/entromancy, and we'll see you soon.